Pigeon pose is a funny pose. It's one of those poses where you either love it or you hate it. And for me as a teacher, it's actually a pose that I haven't taught in my classes in well over a decade. And there's many good reasons for that. We tend to go to pigeon pose when we feel like our hips, our glutes, really deep into those hips feel tight. And for some people, it gives us a sense of wonderful release. And for other people, it tends to create a little bit more pain and strain. So what this tutorial is going to offer us are some alternative ways to address those same spots that you're trying to get to when you do pigeon pose, but we're going to do different movements so that you can get, again, into those same spots, but in a more effective, less pain-free, potentially not great way that pigeon can be for a lot of us. I'm Bree Johnson of Heart and Bones Yoga, and I am here to share applied anatomy tips for you to bring into your yoga practice, so your yoga practice and your teaching for yoga teachers is more anatomy informed, supportive, accessible, inclusive, loving, and wonderful. What your hips actually want for long-term health is to move, is to be used, is to move in all sorts of dynamic ways. And when they move in all sorts of wonderful ways, it's not just about stretching and staying in one position. It's also about offering those little muscles, especially around your joint, and in this case your hip joint, to help support a dynamic movement. So active stretch, dynamic stretch. Let's get into the first one. If you still love pigeon, by all means, go ahead and go and do pigeon. But I'd recommend doing some more of these active or dynamic stretches first, and then your pigeon would potentially be a lot nicer and more sustainable in the long term for your body. Okay, so now this position here, we're gonna go sit on the side. You can also sit onto, fold a blanket or a pillow so that this hip can be lifted up if that feels better, if this position doesn't feel super great in your body. Because both of your feet are over to one side, and we're putting more weight on this front leg. And now what we're going to do is just slide this leg out behind us, and it doesn't have to go super far. You're gonna slide on your heel, and as the knee comes up, the knee's going to open back a little bit, and then rotate it in, slide it slowly back. Slide it in, open, down, back. So I'm really hovering on my hip that I'm sitting on, and this leg is doing all the movement. You can have your hand resting on the floor if that feels more supportive to you. And what makes this now a dynamic stretch is that there's no help. It would be a passive stretch if I used my hand to bring my leg. And the moment I use my hand to bring my leg, that means I'm not going to be using all my muscles as dynamically and as they want to be using. The moment I take my hand away, it's all my leg. All those muscles around the ball and socket joint are having to work to go. So feel that. Let's move to the other side. You would do that. You can repeat that as many times as you like. So again, feet to that side. You're resting, and if you find that you want a little bit more support, again, sit up onto something underneath that hip, and then extend the leg. It doesn't have to be fully extended. And then you slide in, open, in, and out. As we do this, I'm going to continue to teach us and talk about active and dynamic stretches. So now, when you're doing a passive stretch, you get a nice stretchy feeling, right? That stretch. And when you do your pigeon, it gives you a good stretchy feeling for most of us, maybe. Now, you're not going to get stretchy feeling here when you do active stretches. In fact, you're probably going to feel fatigue in the muscles. You might even feel cramping in the muscles. And so then, of course, your mind, if you're used to stretching and getting stretchy feeling, and then equating stretchy feeling as, okay, I'm doing something good, and then you go now into something more active and you go, well, that's not stretchy feeling. It's sometimes a hard shift for some of us because of that. So I hope after this lesson you realize, okay, I can start to shift my mind and recognize that when I do active things, that's what my hip joints want. That's what all the muscles and tissue surrounding the hip joint actually want, and will help my mobility, your range of motion. It'll help the strength, and they'll be more healthy in the long run because you're using the muscles rather than just sitting there and stretching them. Okay, so that's one of the really important parts about dynamic stretches. Let's do some more dynamic stretches. So one of the things that those hip joints really love is internal and external rotation. My goodness, if you do nothing else for your hips and just do this kind of work, you are going to be a step ahead. So some internal and external rotation. One of my happiest, favoriteest ways is to do it with the hands behind, your heels on the ground, and your feet can be a little bit wider than hip width apart, wider than your mat apart. And we're going to rotate the knees together, rotate the legs apart. Now, this is going to get progressively more active. So we can do it passive in a sense if we just let the legs flop. So let's start with our legs and just let them flop. So flop, there's not a lot of muscular effort here, right? There's still benefits, but not a ton of muscular effort. We're not kicking on those deeper muscles surrounding our hip joints yet. So let's kick them on a little bit more. So now you can have the hands off the ground, you can have them supporting you, it's up to you. Now press your heels more firmly into the floor. Press the heels more firmly into the floor and feel like you're pulling your heels towards your body without actually moving them. All of a sudden that's kicking the hips on a little bit more. And then you're going to bring the knees towards each other. You're going to do the same movement, knees apart. Exactly the same movement that we just did, but the difference is now we're being more intentional about pressing the heels into the floor, creating a sense of resistance through this movement. And that sense of resistance, as you're pressing your heels down, you're almost feeling like they're dragging towards you without actually being dragged, kicks on those little muscles surrounding your hip joints, and now they're working. So if you feel, again, like when you go to do pigeon pose because you feel tension around your hip joints or tension deep into your glutes, this kind of work is going to address it in a different way, a more effective way. And in the long term, the more you add these movements in more frequently into your body, the less you'll need to go to some of those passive stretches like pigeon pose, because you're actually giving your body what they need with these active and dynamic stretches. Okay, release out of that. Now, one of the other benefits about pigeon pose is not only that it gives that deep stretch feeling into the hip and the glute, but it also provides a nice extension into the feeling of tightness in the hip flexors. So let's go into a lunge, because pigeon is sort of a lunge, right? In pigeon pose, we get some hip extension, we get a little bit of a lunge, but let's do this a little bit more actively here. So good old-fashioned lunge, you go down, you go deep. It's a little bit passive like a pigeon pose, because if you just go as far as you can, you're letting your body weight hang, and you're letting your body weight move past a more natural, normal range of motion. So what we want to do is stay upright, not go as deep, and we're going to press our foot actively into the floor. You're going to feel like you're pulling your leg towards your body a little bit more. So now there's this active. And you're going to start to move forward. So let's do a quick again, less active way. Just hanging out, letting your body weight do that. More active way, you're going to start to travel forward, but creating resistance the whole way down. You're pressing that front foot down, you're pulling this thigh back, and then it almost will feel like you're kind of scissoring the legs. Shloop, they're kind of going towards each other. So now, yes, you're moving down and forward, but there's resistance, there's more work. Same thing, we're going to come out and you're going to get a sense of resisting that. So both of your leg bones want to go in opposite directions, coming up and then again coming forward. So this is so lovely. I don't know if you can tell, again, hopefully you're not just watching this, you're doing this with me, because it's a big difference between just hanging out, coming up, hanging out, coming up. What we're really doing is, again, what I call shlooping. You kind of shloop that front femur bone, back femur bone reaches forward, front femur bone goes back, that's that scissoring of the legs, down, and then up. Let's try that to the other side. So this is getting into, again, those front areas of the hips, passive stretch. Let's all try that first. Yay, ooh. Okay, now notice how that feels. Not a ton of muscular action, but you're going to feel probably that stretchy feeling. Coming back up, press the front foot into the floor. And then feel the front thigh bone pull back. Front of the pelvis moves forward. Create resistance. Use that foot. Only go as far as you can be resistant. You won't go as deep as if you're just going to hang, right? So go stop before then. Come back out with resistance. So the whole time you're actively resisting the movement, and in that work and that resistance work is kicking on the muscles, making this more dynamic and functional for your hip joints. Whew. Okay, lots to think about, lots to talk about, lots more we could unpack. If you have questions, leave them in the comments and I'll answer them and maybe do a future video about breaking down even more aspects of pigeon pose here. But fourth, go try this. Have fun with anatomy-informed yoga.